Apple is taking a big bite on India's manufacturing capabilities. Two reasons why. First, of course, is the Indian government's push last year through electronics PLI that incentivizes manufacturing of smartphones and other accessories in India. The second, as we know, is emanating from supply chain challenges that China introduced during its zero-COVID policy even until late last year. A Bloomberg report states that $7 billion worth of iPhones have been exported from India last fiscal. This number, of course, that Bloomberg has reported is a little higher than the $5 billion figure that came out yesterday. And if we go with this $7 billion figure, then this is in fact 7% of the total iPhones manufactured worldwide. This, of course, is not much in comparison with the lion's share that still belongs to China. Estimates suggest that this number will be equated, though, to that of China, as more manufacturing is likely to shift from China to India in the later half of this calendar year. Moreover, India is expected to take its Apple manufacturing from 7% currently to over 25% in the next 4 or 5 years. Add to that, of course, the touch and feel at Apple stores, one each in Mumbai and Delhi, launching next week. And this, of course, is a result of FDI restrictions which were earlier imposed, that 30% of sourcing has to happen from India for any international brand to set up shop in India. That got relaxed in the year 2018. Now, from India's total export bucket of $447 billion last fiscal, this number of 7 billion is still a small in terms of percentage, but fairly high as a trend setter for India becoming a manufacturing hub for electronics. My colleague Rakesh Khart joins me for sharing his perspective on Apple's big bite on India. Rakesh, what is this story really, and where is it heading from here? Why is Apple so bullish on India suddenly? Is it only China, and is it only the fact that they were hit because they were practicing just in time as a manufacturing setup and with zero COVID policy that got stuck? Or do you give equal weightage to the PLI incentives?
At the outset, let me first of all say that the Bloomberg report, said that it's an economic triumph for India.
That's
little
right.
Tempting for me to say that,
That's
but
right.
I would be a little playing the devil's advocate.
Okay.
I think that's a little bit of an overstatement.
Okay, so what is the devil in the detail?
Devil is that, like you mentioned, 25% market share for India for overall Apple consumption and revenue, which I think is a far cry.
Right.
25% is the current level as of 2022 December, which is the calendar, for Greater China, which includes Taiwan and Hong Kong and China.
So 25%, this in fact is Piyush Goyal's statement coming from Rome, which came earlier this morning, late night Rome time, saying that in the next 4 or 5 years, that number could become 25% from 7% right now.
I mean, good to have an aspiration,
but
is it realistic? That's where my question comes in.
Okay.
And I'm linking it to the overall Make in India story.
All right.
Huge vision, but it's been a laggard. Let's face the reality, for whatever reasons. I'll come to reasons a little later. But as of today, Make in India hasn't been able to live up to its full promise. So in that sense, the challenge lies in meeting this 25% market share. But yes, on the positive, there are 3 or 4 very, very strong positives which we cannot lose sight of. First of all, this particular number and Apple being involved shows that the Make in India story can get a fresh start. I would say it's a fresh start for Make in India story. Second, when you have Apple as the brand ambassador for Make in India story, what better could better than that it could get? Thirdly, it's a celebration of the Indian consumer. And Apple is now setting up 2 mega full-scale stores in India. So it is celebrating the Indian consumer. Though 7 billion value, 7% market share today, and 1% of that is the Indian consumption. So that again is tipped to grow manyfold with these 2 stores coming, as you mentioned, the touch and feel perspective.
Right.
So,
now this 1%
and
is also under question.
The other positive, Karthik, before I come to that, is it's a celebration of the southern Indian market and reaffirms the fact that South is driving the economic growth story in India with no bias towards the northern India, which it keeps pace and mounts like rival to southern. Then we'll have a bigger story.
Okay, but again, even on this 1% consumption, there is also data coming in that it has actually gone up to 4%. So again, I'm listening to the statement that Piyush Goyal released some time back. Apparently, the number has gone, in fact, it was 1% maybe last year, the fiscal before the last fiscal, and in the last fiscal, apparently the number has reached a figure of 4%, which of course is good to celebrate. But my larger question is, what is keeping us so excited about Apple? We are also manufacturing Samsung phones. We are also manufacturing Vivo phones. In fact, overall, the electronics, the smartphone manufacturing in India has been about $11 billion worth. And this data came yesterday. And 7 billion, of course, as a percentage of 11 billion is huge, but it's also because of the fact that the value of every single device that Apple sells is much higher. So, I mean, why are we so excited about Apple taking this bite on India?
Aren't we all very, very brand conscious? And Apple fits the bill and ticks all the right boxes. So in that sense, I think we shouldn't, I mean, good you pointed out the Samsung story, because Samsung is a full-fledged mega factory here in Greater Noida. So in that sense, they all put together tell us that we are on the right direction. We might have, missed the bus in between, and because of COVID, the delay got further accentuated. But it's also a celebration of the PLI scheme, because that also has come under scrutiny, has come under question whether the targeted subsidy is happening and it's giving the results. On the percentage of 1 or 4%, I think one certain set of data is without any doubt is that there's been a double-digit growth in Indian market over the last couple of years. So I think that points to the strength that Apple has demonstrated in India. But Karthik, it's important to showcase India in the overall global perspective for Apple.
Okay.
It makes an interesting reading. I'm not saying that we shouldn't aspire for 25% and work towards that. Maybe we actually achieve it. But the Apple management from the top, Mr. Cook, has identified 6 countries. So India figures as one of them. It's not the only country where they're going to focus in the next 5 years. So the countries in perspective are Brazil, Mexico, Indonesia, Thailand, and India. And of course, China is there. So we will have a situation where China and India are competing as neighbors. But there is also this huge piece that Apple, being an American company, is trying to develop in regard to what we call now nearshoring. It will also try and shift some piece of business to Mexico, as part of that overall strategy of nearshoring. And of course, we know in every sector today, Vietnam is giving competition to India, which is a very healthy sign globally. Now, what are the global numbers for Apple? It's interesting to look at many GDP of many countries is far less than Apple.
Of course.
So Apple did, I hope the data is right, $394 billion last year, calendar. So $394 billion revenue and $7 billion, it's obviously a little small decimal in the overall, that comes from India. Right. So it's important to put these two very, very important perspectives that Apple is not just focusing on India. Well, it's good to be excited about Apple's, lean into India, but there are competing markets, they have competing advantages, and India may not have all the, advantages. Of course, PLI has been a bit of a game changer when it comes to swinging, because subsidy, who doesn't like a subsidy?
Right.
And there are also a couple of other positives, Karthik, that there are 3 manufacturers right now, what we call supply manufacturers in India, who are making iPhones.
Okay.
So there's Foxconn, there is Winstron, and there is Pegastron.
That's right.
So these are the 3 of them. The good news is that Foxconn has already made a big announcement that it's going to, set up a mega factory. Apple, as of now, employs about 60,000 employees in India. And this big mega factory, I don't have the specs for that right away, but that's an intent.
But apparently 40,000 more jobs are likely to be created in India on account of Foxconn setting up the second plant in India.
Absolutely. So I think the other 2 partners who are there already, they are set to announce ramping up the capability. And also there's a big Indian player, not many men know that. Tata is also doing a part of this Apple components at Hosur, which is again in southern India. So in that sense, a lot of plans lined up, but there's a caveat there.
Okay.
The caveat is that when you set up a mega factory, whether in India, by an Indian or a foreigner or globally, there is a certain expectation from the promoters, and rightly so, that they will have a greater control on the labor landscape. So I understand, I don't have evidence to that effect in terms of whether the letter has been written or not. There is a subtle messaging which might come up during the visit of Mr. Cook and his meetings with Indian leadership on some relaxation in labor reforms, which again is a tough one. It's a bouncer for the Indian government.
Right. Okay. So bouncer. So labor reforms, of course, at factory levels, of course, labor challenges continue to be there. But I think here we are talking about very skilled labor, and skilled labor of a very different ilk, a very different quality benchmark. So what does a trend like this of electronics, high precision goods being manufactured, being assembled in India, what does this do overall in the ecosystem of skilling India? Do you see this as a great fillip for high quality skilling to happen in India at some point?
I mean, as a textbook definition, obviously it is a big flip.
Okay.
But are we ready for that? I have my doubts on that, Karthik. Because three key components where India could probably lose its edge when it comes to cheaper labor is, this hardware, semiconductors, and assembly. I think, we haven't really worked up parallelly. PLI is a great scheme, as Apple has demonstrated or Samsung has demonstrated. But have we built the back end? I'm not too sure whether we've kept pace with the provisioning that Piyush Goyal or other ministers are talking about.
All right. So now help me understand, at some point we are celebrating India's overall export basket growing without Apple, with or without electronics manufacturing. Even if you look at electronics manufacturing, 11 billion, not a huge number, right? Export number. Overall, India's export bucket has grown. But data that came last night also shows that India's imports have risen drastically, 16% on accounts of goods that India is importing. Now, doesn't it sort of, make us a little uncomfortable that at one point we are talking about increasing our export volume and at the other end, our imports are also growing significantly?
It's an unequal battle, and I think for foreseeable future, it's going to be like that between imports and exports for India. Imports are not a bad item, for the economic growth story. Fundamental economics tells us that you need also strong imports because we don't make everything in India. So to fuel the economic growth story at the macro level, we do need imports. And obviously, we need to keep pace with exports so that we don't have a vulnerability when it comes to balance of trade payment challenge. But, that's the macro picture. When it comes to consumer electronics, there are some numbers that have been, again, provided for by the government at the Commerce Ministry. I was reading those numbers. They're, again, encouraging. So, 300 billion is the manufacturing, $300 billion is the manufacturing number for 2026 for consumer electronic, volume in terms of manufacturing. Out of that, 120 billion is the target for exports.
Okay.
So again, an interesting number. So someone is putting it on the drawing board, which is a very good thing. Forecasting from an economist's perspective and forecasting from a government perspective. I think I would give greater marks to the government in any day than pure play forecast. And we've done some things right. That's why companies like Apple are showing interest in India. And I do understand also there are 17 applicants from China, or Greater China as it's called now, who have applied for the PLI scheme to give a push to this consumer electronic perspective. I don't know the status of them, but if PLI has to happen, Government of India should be a little more open to encourage and enable all these companies coming in. But we have a geopolitical and a geo-economic challenge in China. I don't know how the Ministry of External Affairs and Ministry of Commerce and finally the Prime Minister's office are looking at it. Are they looking at it together, or they're looking at it in a disunited manner? And what is the overall strategy? As I keep saying, India cannot decouple itself from China when it comes to economic relations. We must prioritize the political, the border disputes, settling them in our favor, but we must not lose sight of the economic opportunity when it comes to China.
Right. So you're talking about the geopolitical and the geo-economic, strain or strength that India and China could leverage. But talk to us about how the US is viewing China right now, and especially in the aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine war. And of course, whatever concerns on supply chain that continue to fester during COVID and beyond that. So how is the US viewing China right now? And what is in it for the US and US-based manufacturers to move manufacturing from China to India?
See, the US-China economic relations are a love-hate-love relationship. They're not saying that we are sworn enemies. They're not saying we are sworn strategic partners. So it's like, you take two steps, I take two steps, we walk together. But yes, when it comes to companies like Apple, I think there is a discreet and a subtle messaging that you need to diversify your portfolio, given the recent China experience. Now again, here China, to my mind...
So do you think there is a cost competitiveness that India is offering? Because US is as capitalist as they come, right? So is it a cost advantage that they are seeing here, or is this risk mitigation, or a mix of both?
I would say, Karthik, it's a mix of both.
Okay.
Because, on cost competitiveness for India, which again, I said, countries like Vietnam, which is happening in the IT outsourcing sector, they're competing with us and probably readying themselves to beat us on the cost advantage. But the bigger advantage for India would be the risk mitigation. Because I think when Apple comes to India, we have had few foreign companies exit India in the power sector. American company, Cogentrix, withdrew from India. So Bechtel hasn't, there was another big power company which exited for whatever reasons. There was this counter guarantee issue, which is on the P&L of the company.
Right.
But in this case, and Apple would be very happy to diversify the portfolio and expand its base in India. And that statement and that noise is going to manifest and grow in the next 1 week or so when Mr. Cook meets Tim Cook. But again, I'm playing the devil's advocate. I don't think we should read too much into Apple moving completely out of China and into India for two reasons. Because, China has its own advantages. It is a regimented environment, but there is a certain guarantee in terms of what, the deliverable is.
Okay.
Because in India, at times, you're thrown into an environment where you don't know what has hit you. Because we are a democracy.
Right.
And you cannot quench and quell a voice which may be genuine or may not be genuine. Right. So in that sense, the hope and expectation that Apple will move completely from there to India is, I think, misplaced. If you know, and you would already, the announcement has been made, Apple is ramping up its product portfolio in India.
Okay.
It's talking about iPods,
AirPods,
MacBooks, and AirPods,
right.
MacBooks and iPods. These are three, but unlikely yet on the most modern and the revenue high or return high products like iPhone 15. And
right, because right now, bulk of the manufacturing that is happening in India, in fact, is the iPhone 11, which is likely to get phased out very
11
very
to 14.
11 to 14, but the bulk actually is iPhone 11s.
I have read somewhere, I don't know if there are some global reports, but it's not been confirmed either by the government or Apple, that the casing for iPhone 15 as a component, probably Tata's is doing it, I don't know, we don't have visibility of that, is proposed to be done from India.
Okay.
So that's a small part of the larger pie that iPhone 15 and its variants would generate in the days to come.
Right. So Rakesh, we've got PLI. It's an incentive. We've got labor which is getting skilled, if not skilled already. We've got a huge market within India as well as an export-worthy market. We celebrate Apple opening stores in India, Apple manufacturing in India, Samsung manufacturing in India, Vivo continuing to make investments in factories in India. Why don't we have an Indian smartphone brand which is as competitive as a Samsung or an Apple yet? What is stopping us from really making our own made in India smartphone brand which we can export to the world, and then we are not really worried about about anything to do with China or anything to do with US sort of mitigating its risks and taking a punt on us?
I think a very valid aspiration, but are we ready for that? Let's be realistic.
Why not? We had HCL at one point. HCL, before it sort of, augmented itself into a completely service-driven organization, service-driven IT sector, it used to manufacture computers. The hardware, the applications that went into it, everything, we used to have those products. Why is it that we haven't, after so many years of a boom in the smartphone industry, why haven't we yet been able to create a brand?
Let me respond to that in two ways. At the macro level, why is Make India not been able to do the dent that it was supposed to do, make the lasting impression? One reason is shortage of labor reforms, and the other big one is land reforms. When you set up a mega factory, you need that space. Both these critical business-linked.
But we have states which are offering this land reform incentive. We have Tata setting up factories.
Not without troubles. Not without trouble. So that trouble is a challenge. Labor reform is a challenge. Labor competitiveness is a plus.
Yeah.
But scale, I think scale and the capex is a very large, issue here. I would have expected, and I still imagine, Reliance probably is best placed to bring this idea up front.
Okay.
But now that it has tied up with Microsoft, Google, and all the three big players,
it'll get restricted.
I don't know whether it will have the freedom to actually compete at some level with them, because there's a Google iPhone also.
But we've had Indian brands in other sectors compete with global giants. We've had Tata Motors, for example, compete with a Hyundai, compete with even a Maruti Suzuki, which came into India through a Japanese joint venture.
I'm so happy and proud of the Maruti Suzuki story.
Right.
And I've covered it for the last 30 years. I've been looking at the leadership. The challenge is that, we still, for quite some time, were dependent on the Japanese technology, on the, we had the workforce.
Of course.
We had the discipline.
We were dependent on the engine. We were dependent on the design.
For quite some time, maybe you were much younger then. The one big story, which I've covered for months and years when I was at Economic Times, was the gearbox technology.
Right.
As simple as that.
Right.
If you transport that challenge to today's challenge, it is semiconductors, it is assembly, it's hardware.
Right.
So who is going to invest in that? Who has the capex to do that?
Private sector. The opportunity is huge.
Yeah, I know, but who guarantees? See, P&L sheet. You studied management, so P&L has to have a time frame on returns.
Correct.
I think Jio has done well with the Jio as a service, because we had a lot of there were a lot of skepticism. I also was thinking that 450 million subscribers today, reaching that in a record time,
and it entered the market when the market was saturated. You had Tata, you had Vodafone, you had Airtel, you had the government, BSNL. It entered at a time when the market was saturated and still.
And I don't know if you would remember that when the auction was done in 2010, Reliance didn't do it upfront.
Right.
It was done by another company, which then surrendered the auction to. So maybe a company like Reliance is working at it. Maybe any other big ticket, as you mentioned, a technology company. I think a tech background with the capability to assemble these skill sets is best suited to do it. And but when you do so, you're competing with again an Apple and a Samsung.
And what's wrong with that?
No, I'm not saying no. It's a very happy situation.
It's a happy situation.
But there has to be an enabling environment.
So what is missing in the enabling environment?
I told you two of the biggest reforms. And
so land reforms, labor reforms.
Next 1.5 years till the new government is formed, you can't even utter this word in the political lexicon.
You're going on record.
No, I'm saying I will utter it. The politicians will not utter it. I'll keep uttering it. I'll say put it on the economic manifesto. But believe me, even the most liberal, most advanced political party in a stated document is not going to say it. And, it takes a courage to do it politically. That's Article 370 and then, Mandir yahin banayenge. All that is fine. That is, to my mind, relatively easier. Because land also gets stuck in the state subject.
So why can't state governments take this resolve? They keep doing investor summits. They keep looking for capex investments by the private sector, by government sectors into their state. Why can't these reforms be done at a state level? States which are more progressive, which are in a better state to really receive the kind of capex investments and enable that environment.
Well, the good news is that it's happening. It has started happening. Look at Foxconn project for Karnataka and Telangana. So, the leadership.
But again, this is contract manufacturing. I am really talking pure play brand building.
No, I'm talking about
Indian.
I'm trying to give you the overall intent. So, it is happening in that sense. But who will build the car? I think the government of India, with an able minister like Piyush Goyal and Ashwini Vaishnav. This particular government did away with what we used to call GOMs. It was a very bad word in UPA. Group of ministers meant kuch nahi karna. Isko thande vaste mein dal do. So I think they need to set up and converge energies. And from a distance, Karthik, I think what you are aspiring for would probably make the current dispensation led by Mr. Modi extremely happy, because he built in this PLI. And we discussed it yesterday. There is already criticism of this being seen as another episode of Mr. Modi and his government being close to the industry. So in that sense, he's taking the political, what we call, biting the bullet, but with consequences. But post-elections, I think this is a very valid aspiration, something which is within the reach of the acumen of this country. We have the best skilled manpower. I would say that we need to quickly mount a task force or, an emergency task force in building the back end. If that happens, and bring in, Tata is already involved, bring in a few other players and try and create this infrastructure and the dream that you're living and I am co-living, and the countrymen would be very proud to have a product which is ours own, like Maruti you said. Now the technology transfer is absolutely complete. So it's a purely Indian car, though it's majority owned by Japanese, but that doesn't matter when you're driving it. It's an Indian built car, and it also has a huge exports. Hyundai, 50% of Hyundai's production,
manufacturing, and not just for the Indian
market,
market,
it's for the export.
Even for the export market.
No, in fact, I've been talking to Hyundai over the last few years that why not competing head on with Maruti for the domestic market. They said our P&L overall orientation is that exports,
business value in exporting.
In 50% exports. So in that sense, it's brilliant. Tata's also has a leg out, as we were discussing in one of our shows day before yesterday.
Great. Rakesh, always a pleasure having these very insightful discussions with you off camera as well as on camera. And I hope our viewers have enjoyed your perspective as much as I have. So thank you so much for joining me, Rakesh.
Thank you, Karthik. I did play a bit of a devil's advocate, but I think it's important to state the ground reality.
Like I stated, the devil is in the detail, and I think you've got all the detail out here in terms of labor reforms, land reforms, and a reform of the mindset more than anything else. So Rakesh, thank you so much. And with that, it's a wrap, not just on today's Business Plus, but even for this week. We'll be back on Monday. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.